Good morning, boys and girls, and all of God's children. We welcome you to the South District Church School neighborhood. I'm Sister Angie Spears, the excited South District Church School Superintendent. Our presiding elder is the Reverend Janet Jenkins Sturdivant of the South District of the Philadelphia Annual Conference. Again, we welcome you to today's virtual church school lesson. Our lesson today, our key word is wisdom. Wisdom. Do you know what wisdom is? It's about being smart and doing the right thing. For instance, if it's raining, you'd be wise to take an umbrella with you so that you wouldn't get soaked. Am I right? When I shared today's word with Patches and Buttercup had a wonderful example. He said that he was invited to go fishing with his friend Archie and Archie's dad. But the dad said, Buttercup, I have to pick you up at 6 o'clock because I have to get there nice and early. You have to be ready, otherwise we're just going to keep going. So this is how wise Buttercup was. When he got home from school that day, when his friends called to come out to play, he went, nope, I got to get ready. He did his homework right away. He cleaned up his room. He even took his bath the night before. And before going to bed, he set his alarm so that he would not oversleep. He did all the right things to show wisdom. So the next morning, when Archie and his dad pulled in the driveway, Buttercup was ready and he had a great time. He used wisdom in many different ways. Our lesson today is coming from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. And our lesson title is A Just King. This is the story of King Solomon. And we remember who King Solomon is, don't we? He was the son of King David. And Solomon, in a few lessons ago, we learned how Solomon was honored to be able to build the temple for God. It was quite an honor. Well, when we meet Solomon in today's story, he is the king. And what we want to know is that Solomon is known for having wisdom. And that's because he asked God. He asked God to give him wisdom. And so let's go into our lesson today. It's called A Just King. Again, we're reading 1 Kings, chapter 3, verses 16 through 28. And I'm using our AME literature, the junior book. Later, 2 women came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then on the 3rd day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the 2 of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him." So you see the story, what's happening? You have 2 women coming to the king, and the one is saying, we both gave birth to the babies. We each had a baby, but this woman's baby died because she laid on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from me beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. So she's telling the king what happened is that my baby was alive, and that lady, when her baby died, she switched the babies. When I arose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not my son. But the other woman said, now the other woman is speaking up, "No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours." The first said, "No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine." So they both argued before the king. What is the king to do? Now we're going to see how wise Solomon is. Then the king said, the one says, this is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. While the other says, not so. Your son is dead, and my son is the living one. So the king said, bring me a sword. And they brought a sword before the king. The king said, divide the living boy in two. Then give half to the one and half to the other. But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other woman said, it shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, give the first woman the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. What did you think of that story? Do you see how wise the king was? He realized that if he was going to threaten to have the child divided, that the real mother wouldn't have it. She would rather the child live and go to the other mother versus to see her own son killed. And so because the one woman said, go ahead and divide him, the king knew through his wisdom, that's not the real mother. And the people were so pleased with the wisdom of the king. Let's take a look at that memory verse again. The memory verse is 1 Kings 3, verse 28. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. So all of Israel, when they heard how wise their king was, that made them happy. Isn't it wonderful to know that the people that are leading you are using good judgment and wisdom? And what's interesting is that with Solomon, when he first became king, he was only 14 years old. And yet, he pleased God by asking for wisdom. We're told that God visited him in a dream and told Solomon to ask him whatever he would want for, whatever he wanted. And Solomon replied saying that he says, you have given my father David great mercy to sit on the throne. And he asked God if he would give him wisdom so that he, Solomon, would be able to discern between good and bad. And the people that live in that kingdom, they're so happy that they have a king who's asked for wisdom, and they see that wisdom. I think that we should, it tells us how important wisdom is for us and for our leaders. And we should pray for our leaders and pray that God will give them wisdom and they will act upon that wisdom. And we need to thank God for our parents and pray that God will always give them wisdom as they are doing things for us. We thank God so very much for who he is. Solomon is known for writing several books in the Bible, and one of them is the book of Proverbs. One of the verses I think that we know very well is Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. And chapter 3:5 is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your path. That's Solomon who wrote that. I'm hoping you'll take the time this week to read all of Proverbs chapter 3. It's filled with wisdom. For instance, verses 13 through 17, again, it's King Solomon who wrote this. Blessed are those who find wisdom, those who gain understanding. for she is more profitable than silver and yields better returns than gold. She is more precious than rubies. Nothing you can desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are pleasant ways, and all her paths are peace. Solomon has learned how important wisdom is. Am I right? Let's take a look at our key verse again. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. Can you do that with me? All Israel heard of the judgment that the had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the of was in him to execute justice. Were you able to fill that in with me? Let's do it together. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice. They were very happy to know that they had a wise king. We hope that you enjoyed this lesson. And again, I do hope that you'll take the time to read Proverbs chapter 3 during the week. Next week, our lesson is called, our title is God Promises Justice. It's coming from Zephaniah chapter 3, verses 1 through 2, verse 5, and then 12 through 13. So take the time to read that during the week as well. Until then, God bless you. Bye-bye.